The Royal Flying Corps was the air arm of the British Army before and during the First World War, until it merged with the Royal Naval Air Service on 1 April 1918 to form the Royal Air Force. During the early part of the war, the RFC supported the British Army by artillery cooperation and photographic reconnaissance. This work gradually led RFC pilots into aerial battles with German pilots and later in the war included the strafing of enemy infantry and emplacements, the bombing of German military airfields and later the strategic bombing of German industrial and transportation facilities. At the start of World War I, the RFC, commanded by Brigadier General Sir David Henderson, consisted of 5 squadrons, 1 observation balloon squadron and 4 aeroplane squadrons. These were first used for aerial spotting on 13 September 1914, but only became efficient when they perfected the use of wireless communication at Obers Ridge on 9 May 1915. Aerial photography was attempted during 1914, but again only became effective the next year. By 1918, photographic images could be taken from 15,000 feet, and interpreted by over 3,000 personnel. Parachutes were not available to pilots of the RFC's heavier-than aircraft, nor were they used by the RAF during the First World War, although the Calthrop Guardian Angel parachute was officially adopted just as the war ended. By this time parachutes had been used by balloonists for 3 years. On 17 August 1917, South African General Jan Smuts presented a report to the War Council on the future of air power. Because of its potential for the devastation of enemy lands and the destruction of industrial and populous centers on a vast scale, he recommended a new air service be formed that would be on a level with the Army and Royal Navy. The formation of the new service would, moreover, make the underutilized men and machines of the Royal Naval Air Service available for action across the Western Front, as well as ending the inter-service rivalries that at times had adversely affected aircraft procurement. On 1 April 1918, the RFC and the RNAS were amalgamated to form a new service, the Royal Air Force. The RAF was under the control of the new Air Ministry. Origin and early history. With the growing recognition of the potential for aircraft as a cost-effective method of reconnaissance and artillery observation, the Committee of Imperial Defense established a subcommittee to examine the question of military aviation in November 1911. On 28 February 1912 the subcommittee reported its findings, which recommended that a flying corps be formed and that it consist of a naval wing, a military wing, a central flying school and an aircraft factory. The recommendations of the committee were accepted, and on 13 April 1912 King George V signed a royal warrant establishing the Royal Flying Corps. The Air Battalion of the Royal Engineers became the military wing of the Royal Flying Corps a month later on 13 May. The Flying Corps' initial allowed strength was 133 officers, and by the end of that year it had 12 manned balloons and 36 aeroplanes. The RFC originally came under the responsibility of Brigadier General Henderson, the Director of Military Training, and had separate branches for the Army and the Navy. Major Sykes commanded the military wing and Commander C.R. Sampson commanded the naval wing. The Royal Navy, however, with different priorities to that of the Army and wishing to retain greater control over its aircraft, formally separated its branch and renamed it the Royal Naval Air Service on 1 July 1914, although a combined Central Flying School was retained. The RFC's motto was Per Ardua ad Astra. This remains the motto of the Royal Air Force and other Commonwealth Air Forces. The RFC's first fatal crash was on 5 July 1912 near Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain. killing Captain Eustace B. Lorraine and his observer, Staff Sergeant R.H.V. Wilson, flying from Lark Hill Aerodrome. An order was issued after the crash stating, "Flying will continue this evening as usual," thus beginning a tradition. In August 1912, RFC Lieutenant Wilfred Park RN became the first aviator to be observed to recover from an accidental spin when the average E-cabin biplane, with which he had just broken a world endurance record, entered a spin at 700 feet above ground level at Lark Hill. 4 months later, on the 11th of December 1912, Park was killed when the Handley Page monoplane in which he was flying from Hendon to Oxford crashed. Ranks in the RFC aircraft. Aircraft used during the war by the RFC included Airco DH-2, DH-4, DH-5, DH-6, and DH-9, Armstrong Whitworth Fk-8, Avro 504, Bristol's Bristol Scout single-seat fighter, F-2A and F-2B fighter two-seaters, Handley Page 400, Martinsyde G-100, Moran Saulnier Bullet biplane Parasol, Newport Scout 17, 24, 27, Royal Aircraft Factory BE-2A, BE-2B, BE-2C, BE-2E, BE-12, FE-2B, FE-8, RE-8, SE-5A. Sopwith Aviation Company 1.5 Strutter, Pup, Triplane, Camel, Dolphin, Spad S7, Vickers FB5. Structure and growth. On its inception in 1912, the Royal Flying Corps initially consisted of a military and a naval wing, with the military wing consisting of 3 squadrons each commanded by a major. The naval wing, with fewer pilots and aircraft than the military wing, did not organize itself into squadrons until 1914, separating itself from the RFC that same year. In November 1914, the Royal Flying Corps, even taking the loss of the naval wing into account, had expanded sufficiently to warrant the creation of wings consisting of 2 or more squadrons. These wings were commanded by lieutenant colonels. In October 1915, the Royal Flying Corps had undergone further expansion, which justified the creation of brigades, each commanded by a brigadier general. Further expansion led to the creation of divisions, with the training division being established in August 1917 and RFC Middle East being raised to divisional status in December 1917. Additionally, although the Royal Flying Corps in France was never titled as a division, by March 1916 it comprised several brigades and its commander had received a promotion to Major General, giving it in effect divisional status. Finally, the air raids on London and the southeast of England led to the creation of the London Air Defence Area in August 1917 under the command of Ashmore, who was promoted to Major General. Squadrons. 2 of the first 3 RFC squadrons were formed from the Air Battalion of the Royal Engineers. No. 1 company becoming No. 1 Squadron, RFC, and No. 2 company becoming No. 3 Squadron, RFC. A second heavier than air squadron, No. 2 Squadron, RFC, was also formed on the same day. No. 4 Squadron, RFC, was formed from No. 2 Squadron in August 1912, and No. 5 Squadron, RFC, from No. 3 Squadron in July 1913. By the end of March 1918, the Royal Flying Corps comprised some 150 squadrons. The composition of an RFC squadron varied depending on its designated role, although the commanding officer was usually a major, with the squadron flight the basic tactical and operational unit, each commanded by a captain. A recording officer would act as intelligence officer and adjutant, commanding 2 or 3 NCOs and 10 other ranks in the administration section of the squadron. Each flight contained on average between 6 to 10 pilots with a senior sergeant and 36 other ranks. The average squadron also had on complement an equipment officer, armaments officer and a transport officer, in charge of 22 other ranks. The squadron transport establishment typically included 1 car, 5 light tenders, 7 heavy tenders, 2 repair lorries, 8 motorcycles and 8 trailers. Wings in the Royal Flying Corps consisted of a number of squadrons. When the Royal Flying Corps was established, it was intended to be a joint service, and given the rivalry that existed between the British Army and Royal Navy, certain new terminology was thought necessary in order to avoid marking the Corps out as having a particular Army or Navy ethos. Accordingly, the Corps was originally split into 2 wings, a military wing and a naval wing. By 1914, the naval wing had become the Royal Naval Air Service, having gained its independence from the Royal Flying Corps. By November 1914, the Flying Corps had significantly expanded, and it was felt necessary to create organizational units which would control collections of squadrons. The term wing was reused for these new organizational units. The military wing was abolished and its units based in Great Britain were regrouped as the administrative wing. The RFC squadrons in France were grouped under the newly established First Wing and the Second Wing. The First Wing was assigned to the support of the First Army, whilst the Second Wing supported the Second Army. As the Flying Corps grew, so did the number of wings. The Third Wing was established on 1 March 1915, and on 15 April the Fifth Wing came into existence. By August that year, the Sixth Wing had been created, and in November 1915 a Seventh Wing and Eighth Wing had also been stood up. Additional wings continued to be created throughout World War I in line with the incessant demands for air units. The last RFC wing to be created was the 54th Wing in March 1918, just prior to the creation of the RAF brigades following Sir David Henderson's return from France to the War Office in August 1915. He submitted a scheme to the Army Council which was intended to expand the command structure of the Flying Corps. The Corps wings would be grouped in pairs to form brigades, and the commander of each brigade would hold the temporary rank of Brigadier General. The scheme met with Lord Kitchener's approval, and although some staff officers opposed it, the scheme was adopted. The following brigades were established: 1 Brigade, 2 Brigade, 3 Brigade, 4 Brigade, 5 Brigade, 6 Brigade, Middle East Brigade, Palestine Brigade, 7 Brigade, Training Brigade, 8 Brigade. The IX, X and She brigades were formed as part of the Royal Air Force and never existed as RFC formations. Stations: United Kingdom, Canada. The Royal Flying Corps Canada was established by the RFC in 1917 to train aircrew in Canada. Air stations were established in southern Ontario at the following locations: Camp Borden 1917 1918, Alma Heights Field 1917 1918, Leaside Aerodrome 1917 1918, Long Branch Aerodrome 1917 1918, Curtis School of Aviation, Camp Rathbun, Toronto 1917 1918, Camp Mohawk Airport 1917 1918, located at the Tyndanaga Indian Reserve near Belleville 1917 1918, Hamilton 1917 1918, Beamsville Camp 1917 1918, located at 4222 Sun Road in Beamsville, Ontario. Hangar remains and property now used by Global Horticultural Incorporated. Other locations: St. Omer, France 1914 to 1918, now St. Omer Wizens Airport and site of British Air Services Memorial. Ismailia, Egypt Wing HQ, now Al Ismailia Air Base. Abu Qir, Egypt 1916 to 1918 Wing HQ. Abyssinia, Egypt 1917 1918, now Abyssinia Air Base, also used by RAF during World War II. El Ferdin, Egypt. El Rimmel, Egypt 1917 1918, later as Rafael Amaria and now abandoned. Camp Taliaferro, North Texas, USA 1917 1918, sites now either residential development or commercial, industrial parks.